Okay, this week's Torah portion is Shmini. It's a very special Torah portion, like every Torah portion is special, obviously. But the reason that I'm thinking about it being so special is because it has the laws of kosher. And kosher is a mitzvah that we get to do not once a day, not twice a day, but 3 times a day. I'm just looking for my chumash to get started here. But basically the laws of kosher, which animals, which birds, and obviously which fish are kosher or not, are all outlined in this week's Torah portion. So it's a very important mitzvah that we could all fulfill on a daily basis. And we're going to get to the laws of kosher in a moment. But before we do that, we're just going to start with the beginning of the Torah portion. I can't find my blue Atzkor Chumash, so I'm just going to walk downstairs. I'm sorry for this. I just want to get organized. I'll tell you which page it's on in the blue Atzkor Chumash. So the name of this week's Torah portion is Shmini. The word Shmini means 8. Why is the name of the Torah portion Shmini, 8? I can't think of any other Torah portion that its name is actually a number. There's no Torah portion 5, 7, 11, or anything like that. Even though we just came from the holiday of Passover, when we sang the song, Who Knows One? Echad, Mi Yodeya, Who Knows One? And by association, we have associations for every number, because there's something in Judaism about every number, and every number is special. So, for example, 1 is Hashem, 2 is the tablets, 3 is the patriarchs, 4 is the matriarchs, 5 are the 5 books of Moses. But this is the only Torah portion that the name of the Parsha is Shmini, which means the number 8. So it's actually a number rather than a name. And first I'll tell you what it's about, and then we'll talk about the significance, because the Torah is highlighting that it was on the 8th day. Since the Torah is highlighting it was on the 8th day, there must be great significance with the number 8. So first, let me tell you the name, the page. If you're in your blue Atzkor Chumash, it's on page 588. If you're any other Chumash, just go to the book of Leviticus and go to the 3rd Torah portion in the book of Leviticus, which is Shemini. So what happened on the 8th day? So we are familiar with the 6 days of creation, and then Shabbat being the 7th day. And now we come to the 8th day. What's the 8th day? So if you remember the subject, the end of the book of Exodus was dealing exclusively for many Torah portions with the building of the Mishkan. The building of the Mishkan came after the golden calf. The Jews made a golden calf, and God said, okay, I gave you all this gold and silver when you left Egypt, and what did you use it for? To build a golden calf. Now I want you to contribute it towards building a home for God, a sanctuary, a tabernacle. And this was part of the atonement of the Jewish people for the sin of the golden calf. They were finally atoned, forgiven for their sin of the golden calf. And when the divine presence came down and rested amongst the Jewish people in the desert, in the first synagogue, the first portable tabernacle sanctuary ever to be built, a home for God, this was a sign, a signal, a demonstration by God that he had forgiven them. To give a very simple analogy, imagine a husband and wife have a problem, God forbid, and either the husband or wife moves out, and someone did something wrong and somebody's in big trouble, whether it's the husband or the wife, but then they reconcile and he or she moves back in again. Now that I've moved back in, it shows that we've forgiven each other for the sin. And the same thing is true with God. The divine excuse me, the divine presence departed from the Jewish people after the sin of golden calf. Now God came to reside with the Jewish people. It demonstrated God's forgiveness and atonement for the sin of the golden calf. And we know that the sin of the golden calf is a sin that remains with us till this very day. The Torah says, "Ubiyom pakadati." Whenever I remember the sins of the Jewish people, part of the sin of the golden calf is remembered as well, recounted. That's why when the Holy of Holies, when the Kohen Gadol went on Yom Kippur to the Holy of Holies, they didn't wear any gold, because gold would be reminiscent, would be a reminder of the sin of the golden calf. So going back to the number 8, why is this Torah portion called the number 8, because the opening verse says, "Vayihi bayom hashmini," was on the 8th day. Moses called Aaron and his children and the elders of Israel. What did he call them for? So what happened was, after they built the Mishkan, Aaron was going to be the high priest, and his children were going to be all the future priests. All the Kohanim today, we just came from the holiday of Pesach, where the Kohanim blessed us in the synagogue. That's one of their roles that they still fulfill today as Kohanim. But in the temple times, the Kohanim officiated and ministered in the temple all of the services. They were like the rabbis, the spiritual leaders, guides, mentors, teachers of the Jewish people. So Moses was the king, he was the leader of the Jewish people, and Aaron was the high priest. Unlike Moses, whose children did not become future Moseses, because that form of leadership is not necessarily passed on genetically or hereditarily. It's something each child has to earn. Priesthood is something that continues down the line of succession. Child of a Kohen is a Kohen, on and on and on for generations. So Moses calls his brother Aaron and says, "Okay, Aaron." So to use the term opening day, this was opening day of the tabernacle. Why? Because the previous 7 days, we learned, were the 7 days of inauguration. Moses had to induct, had to inaugurate, had to install. Today we talk about an installation of a rabbi. The real term is the induction of Aaron and his children. There were various rituals and ceremonies and sacrifices. And the 7 days was, so to speak, the transfer of power to Aaron to do his job and fulfill his role as the high priest. And all of his children would be also the Kohanim. Now, Aaron had 4 children, 4 sons, and they were all going to be inducted with him into the priesthood, the family of Kohanim. And excuse me, this all happened on the 8th day, meaning there was the 7 days of Moses inaugurating them, and now they were going to begin their actual service of the temple. And this is why it was called the 8th day. The 8th day was the day that Aaron and his sons began to serve in the holy temple. Now, the Torah specifically refers to it as the 8th day, because it obviously followed the 7 days of Moses inaugurating them. But the name of the whole portion is 8. And the question is, why 8? What is the significance of 8? So as I mentioned earlier, we all know what 6 is. 6 days are the 6 days of creation. 7th day is the day of Shabbat. So if we understand what the 6 days of creation and what the 7th day of Shabbat is all about, we can understand what the 8th day is all about. And to give you a hint what the 8th day is all about, how do we begin the 8th day? We begin the 8th day of creation with lighting a Havdalah candle, because 8th day is following the 7 days. Now it's the beginning of the new cycle of day number 1, but it's the 8th day after Shabbat. Why do we light a Havdalah candle? Does anyone know why on Saturday night, amongst the things we do, we smell the spices to revive our soul, because we're losing the soul of Shabbat. So we have to revive our soul because we're feeling depleted from the joy and the spirit of Shabbat. But why the flame, the multi-wick candle of the Havdalah candle? And the answer is because our rabbis tell us that Adam and Eve, the Torah tells us, were created on Friday. The very same day they were created, they disobeyed the one instruction they had, which was, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. You could eat from all the trees in the garden, just don't eat from that one tree. And we all know within a few hours of their creation on Friday afternoon, they ate from that tree of knowledge and disobeyed God's one commandment. Separate subject, maybe when we get back to Bereshit, we'll talk about that at length. But what did God do? God did not banish them immediately. God kept them in paradise, in Gan Eden, for Shabbat. And here's what our tradition tells us. Our rabbis tell us that on Friday night, the sun did not set, which means in paradise on Shabbat, God kept the sun all night shining brightly. So the first time Adam and Eve experienced darkness was Saturday night when the sun set after Shabbat. And they became frightened. They'd never seen or experienced darkness. So God told them how to strike two stones together and create fire. So fire was created on Saturday night. And that's why we light a Havdalah candle on Saturday night, and we make the blessing, blessed are you God, King, the ruler of the universe, Borei, Morei Ha'ish, that you created fire. Now, there's two types of fire. There's natural fire, which is the sun. If you put something in close proximity to the sun, it will burn. That's God's light. That's God's fire. But then there's the light that man makes, which is what Adam and Eve made on Saturday night. And symbolically, we make the Havdalah candle, we light it to signify that now that Shabbat is ended, our mission is to take the light of Shabbat, which is signified by God keeping the sun burning all Friday night. And now we have to make man-made light, that we have to project and infuse the world with our creation of light, not just God's creation of light, but our creation. Why? Because in the 6 days of creation, God created. And what did God say? You are in my image. As I have created for 6 days, so too Sheshet Yamim Tavot. 6 days you shall work and do all of your labor for 6 days. I'm a creator, you're a creator. But here's the problem. The problem is that if God gave us the ability to create, then what else did God give us the ability to do? Destroy. If you could create, you could also destroy. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov once said famously, if you believe that you could destroy, you have to believe you could also repair and correct. But the flip side of that is, if God gave us the ability to be creators, which is a great blessing that we could all be creative. Everyone loves the word creative. Creative people, everyone's creative in their own way. One's a creative doctor, one's a creative lawyer, one's a creative engineer, one's a creative business person. Whatever you do, you could be creative, creativity. Why do we get so much pleasure when we're creative? Nobody likes a job that has no creativity in it, right? I tell you to go do something mundane, routine, bag groceries at Publix. It's a boring job because there's no creativity. Although I once heard an amazing story. There was a woman who was a bagger in a grocery store. And what she would do is she would every day find a quote, a very inspirational quote, and she would make hundreds of copies of this quote. And every time she bagged someone's groceries, she would put in the quote, that inspirational quote, into their bag. And after a while, when people came to the grocery store or the supermarket, they would line up in her counter, even if the line was longer, because they wanted to get the daily inspirational quote. So I guess that story shows you that even if you have a boring job that has no creativity in it, like just putting groceries in a bag, you can find a way to be creative even in that line of work. But typically people like a challenge, people like a problem, a business, a job, a field that you could use your creative juices. Why do we get so much pleasure from being creative? The joy of doing something. And that's true in learning too. We say Shmona Esrei, when we finish the 3 steps, we say, may God rebuild the temple. God, give us our portion in your Torah. What does that mean, our portion in your Torah? What it means is that everyone has the ability to uncover their particular portion in the Torah, which means their insights. Every person is unique. And the Maimonides says something beautiful. He says, just like no two people's faces look identical, so too no two people's minds think identically. Our faces are a reflection of our brain, our deeper self, our inner face. And therefore, you have a perspective and a vision and a understanding of at least one section of Torah that no one else can think of. And you have to uncover your section of Torah. Be creative in learning. Learning is not just to memorize information. Computers could store information too. Human beings have the ability to have a chidush. What is a chidush? A new insight, a new understanding, a new perspective. The Talmud says, "Ein beit medrash below chidush." There's no study hall without some new concept. If we weren't on Zoom and it was a little easier, maybe we would be sitting around the table, and right at this class, somebody would say, "I have a new understanding." And you know what? If you have a new understanding of what we're learning, share it by all means, because that's what learning is, creativity. So for 6 days, God says you could create, but you could also destroy. So, there's nature and culture. What's the difference between nature and culture? Nature is how God created the world. Culture is what man does with that creation. Now, sometimes nature and culture can clash. Today, there's a term cancel culture, right? It's a separate problem we're dealing with, which we don't agree with, by the way. We don't believe in shaming people. We believe if someone made a mistake, they should be able to say they're sorry, make amends, do teshuvah. We believe in responsibility for your actions, but you don't permanently destroy a person. But that's a separate story. But the idea of culture canceling out nature. Human beings have the capacity to create a culture, a society that destroys the nature or the natural condition that God created the world to be. So Adam and Eve were the first people to do that. They went contrary to what God asked them to do. So then we go into Shabbat. Shabbat is, of course, the day that we connect to God. We rest the way God rested. We try to infuse ourselves with more spirituality, with more godliness, with more awareness of our spiritual destiny and purpose in this world. 6 days we're busy working. We don't have so much time to think about our mission, our purpose in our life. We're busy making money. Now, money is a very important asset. We all need money to live. But just like we value our money and we protect our money and we invest our money wisely, that the money should grow, which is all very important. The Talmud says God cares about the money of people and wants us to use it wisely. It's a resource that God gave us. We can't squander or waste money. But there's a much more precious resource and asset than money, and that is life, time. Just like you have a finite amount of money, no matter how rich you are, you have a finite amount of money. No matter how long you live, there's still a finite number of days, hours, minutes that you have. And therefore, just like you want to protect your money and you want to utilize it wisely and invest it properly because it's an important resource and asset, Shabbat asks us to think about, what about your more important asset, which is your time, your very life and existence? We have this expression, time is money. But that's reducing time and life to the level of money. We all know that, God forbid, when a person is ill, they'll spend all their money to extend their time in life because life is more valuable than money. So Shabbat asks us to think about, how am I spending the most precious resource that I own, which is the time that I have. And nobody knows. People make money and they want to make more money. Why? Because I may lose my money. I may run out of money. I may have a bad deal and not have enough money. Well, just like you don't know how much money you're going to have, you don't know how much time you're going to have. No one knows how much time they have. So therefore, just like you want to protect your money and utilize it wisely, so too with your time. So Shabbat asks us to do that. Now we come to the 8th day. The 8th day is where we now say, okay, we did not follow what God asked us to do. We have the ability to destroy God's world, to bring darkness to the world, which is what Saturday night represents. What are we going to do now to create human light? The Havdalah candle, the 8th day, to project it into the world. And this is precisely why the 8th day was the day that Aaron and his children began worshiping or serving in the temple, because this is what the synagogue and the temple worship represents. It's man's quest and desire to project their human godly light into the world. Just like Aaron and his children did on the 8th day, every human being has to do that. And the synagogue is like the vehicle that we use. You don't have to do it exclusively through the synagogue. We could do it every day in our homes, in our lives, obviously. But what the synagogue represents is that meeting point between man and God. And therefore, it's the place that we try to elevate ourselves and become inspired to fulfill our mission, which is the Havdalah candle symbolism. Now that it's the 8th day, Shabbat is the spirituality imbued from God, from above. It's the gift of Shabbat, natural holiness. Now we have to have man-made holiness, so that the new cycle of the 6 days is not just work, but it's work and light. We use our work as a means to make the world better, tikkun olam, to imbue the world with the presence of Hashem. And that's why it's all about the eighth day and the symbolism of the number 8 and what it represents. And in Kabbalistic terms, a baby has a circumcision on the 8th day. Why the 8th day? Now, medical reasons will tell you that it's all the perfect time to circumcise a baby. And the coagulation of the blood is the thinnest. It's perfect. But the spiritual reason why we circumcise a baby and the covenant between a Jew and God occurs on the 8th day. And now women don't need a circumcision. The Talmud says they're born circumcised. They already have that spiritual connection. But the idea of 8 represents the idea of man transcending his human nature to connect with divine. And that's the idea of the 8th day. The 8th day is, how do we become partners with God? And that's what the tabernacle was about. How man could aspire to connect to God, and through that realize the power of their Jewish soul or their human soul and project the light of their neshama into the world. And this is the significance of the number 8. So the number 8 is 7 is the 6 days of the work in Shabbat. 8 is transcendence, going beyond. So that's just a little understanding of the very name of this week's Torah portion, which is Shemini. Now, Aaron begins his service, and I want to tell you something fascinating. In verse number 2, Moses tells Aaron, okay, this is what you got to do. You got to bring the offering of the ram. And by the way, the first thing that Aaron brought was an egel, a calf, as an offering. And Rashi tells us right away, why a calf? It was symbolic of the fact that God had forgiven the Jewish people for the sin of the golden calf. And he gives them all the instructions up until verse 6, where he says, this is what you shall do, and the divine presence will appear to you, meaning the divine presence will come down and rest in the tabernacle. The very next verse, number 7 of Shemini, says, Vayomer Moshe el Aaron. Moses says to his brother Aaron, Karav el HaMizbeach, come closer, come on, draw closer to the altar and bring the atonement, bring the sacrifices. So the question is, Rashi asked this question. It's a very basic question. He was already instructed to go bring the offerings. Why now does Moses say to his brother Aaron, draw close to the altar and bring the sacrifice? He already instructed him to do it. Aaron should have already been at the altar bringing the sacrifice. So Rashi says that Aaron, even though he was told to go bring the sacrifice, he was reluctant. He was hesitant. He was, as you would say, procrastinating. And Moses had to encourage him and say, come closer, come, let's go. It's time to bring the offering. Why was Aaron reluctant to bring the sacrifice? So I'm going to quote Rashi's words. Rashi says, Shahaya Aaron Bosh. Aaron was ashamed. He was embarrassed. Viyare, and fearful, Lagesha, to draw close to bring the offering. Why was he embarrassed? Why was he afraid? Because we all know at the sin of the golden calf, Aaron facilitated it. And now it's a separate discussion. When we read Kitisa, we'll understand what happened. But the Jews came, they wanted to make a golden calf. Aaron said, go bring the jewelry of your wife. He was trying to delay, figuring Moses would come back down from the mountain. But regardless, he was present. He was in charge of the Jewish people. He was the leader at that time because Moses went to heaven to get the Torah. He put Aaron in charge. And Aaron allowed the golden calf to go forward, whatever his intentions were. But the reality is it happened under his watch, on his dime, so to speak. So he felt, I'm not worthy to be the leader. I'm not deserving to be the high priest after what I did. Now, where have we seen this humility before? Moses at the burning bush. He was also reluctant. He also said, I'm not worthy. So once again, you see both of these brothers had the same quality. When they were chosen, they were reluctant. They were hesitant. They didn't feel deserving or worthy. In Moses' case, it was a general unworthiness, feeling I'm not the most capable, suitable person for this job. In the case of Aaron, there was something specific that he was embarrassed about. And listen to Rashi as Rashi says, Moses responds to his brother when he says, I'm not worthy, I'm embarrassed to go serve. He says, why are you embarrassed? This is what you were chosen for. Which means to say, literally, God chose you because the whole idea of the altar is forgiveness. That's why there is an altar in the tabernacle, to teach this lesson of forgiveness. So yes, you committed a sin or some degree of a sin by participating or allowing it, but now you could be forgiven. But on a deeper level, the Rashi could also be read, you're being chosen because you have this quality of humility. There's a story once the Chafetz Chaim called a student and he said, I need you to go serve as a rabbi in a different community somewhere. The student said, me, I'm not learned enough, I'm not capable enough, I'm not pious enough. And the Chafetz Chaim said, who do you want me to choose and send? A student that thinks he is learned enough, that thinks he is pious enough, he is righteous enough. So if I go to a room with 100 people and I say, who in this room thinks they're righteous? And 50 people raise their hand. Do you think it would be the more 50 righteous people or the less 50 righteous people? It's usually the people who are less righteous that think they're good enough. The people who are truly righteous always feel like, I'm not really fulfilling my full potential. I'm not doing what I can. I could be doing more. They're always demanding more of themselves. So in this sense, Moses says to his brother, this is why you were chosen. And here we have a very first important lesson about leadership. And that is that leadership, demands greatness. But there's a couple of ideas here. The first idea is that it's not that because you're great, you become a leader. It's because you're a leader, you become great, which means to say that once you begin serving others, and leadership doesn't mean that you have to be a Moses or an Aaron. When you say, I'm a leader, what does it mean to be a leader? As Hillel said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? In other words, I realize that my life has a mission and a purpose beyond myself, to serve others. In English, we say public service, right? Leadership doesn't mean that like a dictator where the nation serves you. True leadership is where you are serving others. Leadership is synonymous with serving. By becoming a servant of the people, you become great through that serving of others. And so Moses says to his brother, maybe you feel you're not worthy, but God chose you. And through your leadership, you will become great. And we've seen that in history. Many people who weren't so extraordinary, but through leadership, they became great because when the challenges came, they met the challenge and they rose to the occasions. So this is the first lesson in leadership, that you have to have, it's always humorous, but I'm sorry about my cough. Nothing to do with COVID. I've been vaccinated. It's just this cough I picked up. But going back here, I apologize for the disruption. But the lesson is that a great leader is not someone who feels that they're complete, that they're perfect, but realize that there's a journey, there's more to be accomplished, there's more growth. And having that humility, Moses, we know, was the greatest leader, and the Torah says he was the humblest person that ever lived. So this is clearly a criteria. And of course, in our society, we don't see that. We see the opposite. When people run for election, all they do is go on the campaign trail and they talk about how great they are and how worthy they are and how suited they are and how they're the most capable person to do this job. And what leadership is teaching us from Moses and Aaron is that if you think you're the most suitable person to do something, you're most probably not. It has to come with, okay, I was chosen to do this. And by the way, chosen doesn't mean God's going to come and tap you on the shoulder. If you know, what does it mean to you were chosen? If you have the ability to do something, there's a void, there is a something lacking, and you have the ability to do it, then it means you were chosen to do that because God gave you the ability to do it. Let me go get a cup of water. I'll be right back. So if you find yourself at a place and at a time that you have a skill set or you have a resource or you have a talent or you have that you could help others with, then that means you're being called to do that. Why else did God put you in that place at that time with that ability to do what you can do to help someone else? And leadership doesn't mean you're a leader for many. You could be a leader for one person. You could be a leader for yourself too. So that is the idea of leadership. But here we're going to see a very, very interesting contrast. Thank you so much, Myra. I appreciate that. I couldn't find the cups, so she brought me a bottle. But here we're going to see a very interesting contrast. There's a great tragedy that occurs in this week's Torah portion, an unfathomable tragedy. Everyone knows that one of the worst things that could ever happen, God forbid, is for a parent to lose a child. Losing a parent is bad enough, obviously, but it's natural. For a parent to bury a child is one of the worst tragedies. And when we watch the news in Israel, so often we see Israeli parents having to bury their young Israeli soldier sons or daughters, and it's the most heartbreaking scene in the world. We all have images of funerals like that we've seen over the years, but to see the devastation, the crushing blow to young parents when their beautiful 20-year-old, 21-year-old, 22-year-old son or daughter in the prime of their life, their casket is lowered into the grave. It's the most horrific thing in the world. In this week's Torah portion, Aaron, the high priest, on this day of great celebration, as we said, it was the opening day. It was meant to be the highlight of his life, the day he was inducted to serve as the high priest, something he would bequeath to generations forever until today to the Kohanim. But what happens? On that very day, two of his sons died. His two sons, Nadav and Avihu. Now he had four sons. He had Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Isamar, and two of them die. And if you want to see the story inside, it's on page in the Art Scroll Chumash. It's on page 592. In the English, it's chapter 10. Although the chapters are not, when the Torah was given from Hashem to Moses, there's no chapters. There's no even periods at the end of the verses. Anyone who's read the Torah or gone up for an aliyah or seen the Torah knows there's no periods. There's a truck, there's a cantillation called Sof Pasuk, that it's sung in a way that indicates it's the end of a verse. But God didn't give the Torah in verses, surely not in chapters. It's easier to navigate a book when there's chapter and verse, so we go with these chapters and verses, but they were not from the original Torah. That's something that was inserted much later. But if you look at chapter 10 in the book of Leviticus, in this week's Torah portion, it tells the story. What happened? The sons of Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu each took his fire pan. They put fire in them and placed incense upon it, and they brought before Hashem an alien fire that he had not commanded them. A fire came forth from before Hashem and consumed them, and they died before Hashem. Now, there's so much here to unpack, but we'll take it 3 steps. First step is what happened, and we have to understand what happened. That's a huge discussion. What did these two boys do on the day they and their father were being inducted that they died? The second part is Moses' response to his brother. Moses, he had just finished inducting Aaron, and now his brother lost his 2 sons, which were his nephews, by the way, right? And how does he comfort his brother? So what does Moses say to Aaron? Of this did Hashem speak, saying, I will be sanctified through those who are nearest to me. Thus I will be honored before the entire people. In other words, what Moses is saying to his brother is that your sons did not sin in the traditional way, but rather they, and we still have to explain what they did, but whatever it was, which we'll get back to, Moses is saying to his brother that God was sanctified through those who are nearest to him. That because your sons, and the rabbis take it a step further, that what he was saying to Aaron was, obviously your sons, Nadav and Avihu, by their being consumed with this fire that they brought an offering to God, they died before God, it shows that they are holier than you and I. Because God, to quote Moses, is sanctified through those that are nearest to me, meaning they were nearer to God than I was, than you and I. Now, Moses, sometimes you may think, well, Moses was just trying to make his brother feel good. Moses is Torah Emet. Moshe Emet v'Torato Emet. Moses is all about truth. Moses would not say something that was not true. He's actually saying, your sons are so holy that they will consume before God on this day. Again, something that really has to be understood, difficult subject, a lot to be unpacked. But the third part I want to focus on is maybe the most powerful, and that is Aaron's response. The Torah summarizes Aaron's response in one single word, Vayidom Aharon. Aaron remained silent. Now, the word Yidom is also for the word domem, which means inanimate, which could mean silent or he was numb. And again, many of the laws of grieving are learned from this. There's a law that says when you go to a Shiva house, you sit down and you do not speak until you're spoken to. There's a law that you do not start a conversation. You wait for the mourner to start the conversation. Why? Because maybe the mourner is not in the mood of talking. And in that case, you just tragically, especially when it's Aaron's children, there's a state that Aaron is in that he cannot even speak. In other words, he understands this is from God. He has to accept it. He has to cope with it. But at the same time, there are no words. There's no words. And even though Moses tries to comfort him, he has no response. So let's try to work our way back and say, okay, what happened here? And obviously, we don't have enough time to go into all the commentaries. There is another Torah portion, Acharei, that we actually read on Yom Kippur that talks about the story again, which will come up later in this same book. And there it says they came right after the story there. Moses tells Aaron and his children that no one should ever go into the Holy of Holies in a state of intoxication. I'm sorry, it's right here. It's on the very next page. On verse 8, it says, God tells Aaron, it's not Moses, it's God telling Aaron, do not drink intoxicating wine, you and your sons with you when you come into the tent of meeting, that you not die. So one interpretation is that the sin was that they drank intoxicating wine when they went into the tent of meeting, into the Holy of Holies. Now, you may wonder why they would do that. And we all know that l'chaim is part of our culture as Jews. We always say l'chaim, and we like to say l'chaim on Shabbos and Yantiv to elevate our spirits. And we do it in the shul as well, but not when you're going to pray, not when you're going and you're the Kohen, going to the Holy of Holies. So perhaps they drank these intoxicating wines to sort of boost their spirits, to help them release some of the feeling of the cumberness and the confinement of the body and allow the soul to soar a little higher. That's one reason. But there are many other reasons given. And one other reason given, which is interesting because it would be a contrast to what we said before, is that they were aggressive in their role of leadership. In other words, they were so desirous to serve that they went into the Holy of Holies and were told, don't go at any time, only at the appointed time. In other words, they were a little too ambitious, and instead of standing back and letting Moses and Aaron lead the way, they went ahead, so to speak, and tried to assume a position of priesthood beyond what they were actually instructed to do. And they took it upon themselves to bring an offering into the Holy of Holies. And it was, even though their motivation, their intention was good, it was considered a sin. And these are people on a very high level. And they were consumed before God. Now, again, they're considered holy because Moses says they were even holier than Moses and Aaron. But the lesson here and the contrast is that on the one hand, we shouldn't be too aggressive, meaning too forthcoming in wanting to assume a position of leadership. On the other hand, we shouldn't be too reluctant either. There's a balance between accepting a role of leadership, like Moses encourages his brother Aaron to do, but at the same time not being not having the arrogance, so to speak, to feel that you are worthy of just assuming a role without having been asked to or instructed to do that. In this case, by God himself, they were not told to go into the Holy of Holies with this offering. They took it upon themselves. And so, again, you see this contrast of the humility to say maybe there are others more suitable, but ultimately the willingness to go and serve when the serving is necessary. So, and with this idea of Vayidom Aharon, tomorrow, I believe is Yom HaShoah, the day that commemorates the Holocaust Memorial Day. And it's a little controversial, to be honest with you. Many Jews do not recognize tomorrow as Yom HaShoah because it's in the month of Nisan. And in the month of Nisan is a happy month. And many religious Jews felt this was not the appropriate time to designate as Yom HaShoah. But be that as it may, what is our response to the Holocaust? And Aaron's words are very powerful because there are those who try to give rational explanations, justifications, explanations why the Holocaust occurred. And it's really folly. It's really the height of, if I may say, stupidity. Because first of all, it's cruel to say to someone who suffered a tragedy, well, God had a reason, they were deserving because of this or that. It's inhumane to tell a person who suffered any tragedy, there's a reason, there's an explanation. We as human beings cannot know God's ways and will never understand. And no one in the world understands why the Holocaust occurred. But at the same time, the Jewish people didn't stop being a Jewish people, right? And that's the amazing balance of, on the one hand, acceptance, like Aaron. Aaron accepts it. Vayidom Aaron, he's silent. So he doesn't try to explain it, to justify it, to rationalize it. He doesn't even respond to Moses' words of comfort that your sons were holier and the holiest, and that's why they were consumed. Some people say, the 6 million, they were so holy, God wanted it. No, we don't know. Like Aaron, we're silent. We're mute. We're dumbfounded. We have no words to say and to explain such atrocities, such horrors. At the same time, Aaron carries on his service. Although he changes a few things, he doesn't eat from the flesh of the sacrifices, but he realizes that he must continue to serve as a high priest. And he continues with his other two sons. And till today, we have high priests. And I think that's the amazing thing, that on the one hand, we had the Holocaust and we still are in utter disbelief when we think about how something so horrific could have ever happened. 1.5 million children, 6 million brothers and sisters. But the next day, we still put on our tefillin and we still said Moda Ani in the morning and we still carried on with Judaism. And it's an amazing thing to see that the Jewish people, like Aaron, and maybe this is symbolic of the story of the Jewish people, that here Aaron suffered such a harsh tragedy. And he's so, he's so saddened by the experience that he can't even utter a word, but it's just silence. At the same time, the temple service goes on and the Kohanim carry on till today. And that's the incredible strength and fortitude of the Jewish people, that, we're 70 years away from the Holocaust now. But imagine people who literally went out of the concentration camps and went to the DP camps, and in the DP camps, or even in the camps, observed holidays and Jewish tradition and Torah. And that ability to carry on being Jewish and carrying on saying, look, I don't understand why, I can never fathom, but yet I will continue living as a Jew. And that is an amazing power. I'm just going to tell you a story. I'm sure I've told it before, but Rabbi Abraham Twersky, one of the great rabbis who just passed away this summer due to COVID, actually at the age of 90, he used the following analogy to explain it. He says a mother takes her son or daughter, a baby, 1 year old, to the doctor for the immunization shots. And the doctor takes out the needle and is about to give the child injection. And the 1 year old sees the doctor with the long needle and subconsciously remembers the 6 month visit and starts to cry and hides behind the mother for protection. And the mother takes the child, holds the child down on the examining table as the doctor injects the baby with the shot. And Rabbi Twersky says, as soon as the doctor leaves the room, the baby starts to weep on the mother's shoulder, and the mother comforts the baby, and the baby is crying on the mother's shoulder. And Rabbi Twersky says, let's try to get into the head of the child. The child sees a stranger who in the child's mind is a bad person who wants to hurt the baby. The baby doesn't understand immunization shots. Baby sees a guy who wants to cause him pain. And the child runs to its mother for protection, for help, for defense, expecting fully that the mother's going to help him. What does the mother do? The mother assists the doctor in hurting the child in the child's mind. So when the doctor leaves the room, says Rabbi Twersky, why is the baby crying on the mother's shoulder? The mother just betrayed you. The mother just collaborated with the doctor to hurt you. So what's going on in the child's mind is, I know my mother loves me. I've felt my mother's love from the day I was born. Something bad was about to happen. I expected my mother to save me like she does every time something bad is going to happen to me. She's always there to save me. This time she didn't. She even seemed to have helped the doctor. I can't understand what happened to my mother, why she didn't show me her love at this moment. But when the doctor leaves the room, the child cries on the mother's shoulder again. Why? Because the child is saying, I still know my mother loves me. My faith in my mother's love is so deep and so profound that nothing could take it away, even this moment of lack of comprehension. So Rabbi Twersky says, if the baby can't understand the thinking of the mother or the doctor, why they would do this to him, even though the baby and the mother and the doctor are all human beings with human minds and human intelligence, surely a human being cannot understand a divine rationale or a divine understanding or wisdom. So we'll never understand these things. But the question is, do we stop believing that our mother loves us? Okay, Hashem doesn't love us because of the Holocaust. Or we say, look, like the baby, I don't understand this. It makes no sense. It goes against everything I believe and understand about a loving God. But I still go back to Hashem because I know he loves me. How do I know? Because I feel every day that he loves me. He gives me life. So it's that ability to forge ahead and carry on as a Jewish nation, despite everything that has happened, most recently the Holocaust, which is commemorated tomorrow with Yom HaShoah, is really the power of the story of Aaron and his own children and the story of the Jewish people in every generation. And maybe part of what the story is telling us is this idea that just like the Kohen and his children are a perpetual continuity from generation to generation, we are all a nation of Kohanim. We are a priestly nation, God told us on Mount Sinai. We have to carry on our mission and our purpose. Our mission, our purpose is not aborted. No matter what happens, we still carry on. And the remarkable accomplishment of the Jewish people is that we have carried on and maintained. And not only that, I mean, you look at Israel today, and you look at the Jews in the diaspora, and you see how we flourished after the Holocaust. Jewish life is growing and blossoming and expanding, and especially Israel. 3 years after the Holocaust, we came back to Eretz Yisrael after 1900 years of diaspora. We returned to Eretz Yisrael, and when you see all of this, it's quite remarkable. Someone told me they were in a hotel in Israel once, and there was an elderly couple of Holocaust survivors, like 80-something years old, and they were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. And it was a very religious Haredi family. And the whole family came to this hotel for Shabbat to celebrate their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. They're already great-grandchildren, 50th wedding anniversary. And this person was a guest in the hotel, and this family had a whole section of the dining room, like almost half the dining room, because they were like 150 people. This Haredi family, they had like 10 kids or more, and each one had 7, 8, 9 kids. And there were great grandchildren and all of that. And it was like this huge family, like 150 people, men, women, children, babies. And he said he sat there and he looked at it and he said, wow, 2 survivors. And they fill up half of the dining room in some hotel in Israel. Imagine if there were 6 million survivors who didn't die. 6 million, you know how many hotel rooms and ballrooms and you would need to fill up all of their descendants. So at the same time, we still carry forth. Okay, I want to talk about kosher for 5 minutes before we end, but I want to just tell you something else that's very interesting. If you have a chumash in front of you and you go to chapter 10, verse 16, you will see that there's a star between 2 words. It says regarding the sin offering that Aaron was supposed to bring, Darosh Darash Moshe. Moses inquired about it. It's a story that Aaron didn't want to eat from the flesh because he was grieving for his sons, and he discusses it with his son, with his brother. But the Torah says Darosh Darash, which means Moses insists, in the English they say inquired insistently, but really it's a double expression. He inquired and re-inquired. He doubly inquired, insistently, right? And there's a star between these 2 words. And on the side or right beneath it says, this is the midpoint of the Torah. If you count all the words of the Torah on one side and all the words on the other side, this space between Darosh Darash is the exact midpoint of the Torah. Now, this is fascinating. This that we actually know where the midpoint of the words of the Torah are is fascinating. But that the space between which 2 words is the midpoint of the Torah, you know what a drasha is. A drasha is a sermon, right? Darash means to delve deeper, to inquire, to pierce the superficial veneer surface, but to interpret, to what is a sermon? A sermon is taking a text and going beyond the surface, exploring the deeper meaning and depth of it. And the midpoint of the Torah is this inquiry, because the message is that these 5 books of Moses, it's just the first layer. There's layer upon layer upon layer, deeper, 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 deeper than the deepest seas. And therefore, the midpoint of the Torah says, no matter how much you know, you're only 50% of the way there. You're right in the middle. You still have as much to go as you've learned. No matter how much knowledge you have, there's at least twice as much that you haven't learned yet. And therefore, the midpoint of the Torah is wherever you are, there's more to be doresh. There's more to delve into. We finally come to chapter 11 of Leviticus, famous for the laws of kosher. You know, I'm sure I know I have experienced this. Maybe you've experienced, you meet a non-Jew, doesn't know anything about kosher, and they say to you, well, do you need a rabbi to come and bless it? We know, of course, that kosher has nothing to do with blessing the food, but has everything to do with the ingredients. The Torah tells us there are certain ingredients that you cannot eat, certain ingredients that you're allowed to eat, whether it comes to meat, whether it comes to fish, whether it comes to birds. We're never allowed to eat creeping insects or crawling things that go on the ground or on the bottom of the seabed, like lobster and things like that, crabs or whatever it may be. But kosher meat or food has to have 2 signs. It has to have split hooves and chew its cud. Kosher fish has to have fins and scales. And then when it comes to birds, there is no sign, but rather tells us which birds we cannot eat. And if it's not on the do not eat list, you could eat it. Now, there is a big discussion as to, are these signs merely ways of identifying a kosher animal or fish, or is there something intrinsic about chewing cud or splitting hooves that represent an ideal or a value or an ethic that makes it kosher? And the same thing with fins and scales. So because we have limited time, I'll just tell you the answer is yes. Of course, nothing is random. The fact that these are the signals or the signs of kosher birds or kosher meat and kosher fish is for a purpose. Now, the general idea is that we want to eat food that's clean. We also want to eat animals that do not have aggressive, violent, we don't eat animals of prey that prey on other weak animals. That's number one. But what is the symbolism? So one of the explanations is chew its cud represents regurgitation. What does that symbolize? Next time you eat kosher meat, the idea behind regurgitation is that, don't just absorb something or digest something and think you're done. The idea of chewing your cud, which is something we human beings don't do, but certain animals, kosher animals, bring up their food again and consume it. And the idea is even something that you've learned and you've established in your mind as a premise, as a belief system, as a value, you always have to go back and revisit things. You have to relearn them. You have to re-examine them. Sometimes we make a quick judgment call or an impression about someone or something or a circumstance, and then we just stick with it. Like we don't take the time to explore it deeper or to re-examine it. The idea of chewing your cud means revisit, grow, especially when it comes to other human beings. Re-examine again the facts, the evidence, the situation, and make sure that the conclusion you drew and came to is correct. The idea of split hooves is obviously a partition, a separation between right and left. In other words, part of being a kosher person is to re-examine your values always, but also it means to have distinctions. We talked about Havdalah. Havdalah means separation. There is a philosophy today about, whatever you do is fine because it's good for you. It's right for you. It's all relative, so there's no absolute morals of right and wrong, good and bad, say some. Judaism says there are things that are absolutely good and things that are absolutely bad. And that's the distinction. Hamavdil, which say in Havdalah, is to distinguish between good and bad, right and wrong. So that's the idea of the animals. The idea of the fish as fins and scales. Fins obviously propel the fish to swim. We all have to know how to swim in life. We all have to know how to propel ourselves forward. We even have to know how to swim against the current when everyone's doing one thing and we have to go in a different direction. We have to have the vigor, the strength, the fortitude, the passion, the commitment to go even in an opposite direction. Jews have always swam against the current forever, thousands of years. We were never the mainstream stream. We didn't just go with the mainstream, whatever that stream was. We went on against the current based on our beliefs and our values. So that's the idea of fins. And in a material sense, ambition, drive, propelling yourself forward. Scales represents how you do it. A scales on a fish is like a coat of armor, which means it's a layer of protection, which could represent your integrity, your values. Yes, you have to be ambitious. Yes, you have to be driven. Yes, you have to succeed, but only with your values uncompromised, intact. And that's the scales that shield you from negative influences and environments to make sure that everything you're doing is in a kosher fashion and so on and so forth. So just a little bit about the laws of kosher. But obviously, the Torah says at the end of this week's Torah portion that God took us out of the land of Egypt, so we should be a holy nation. And part of being holy is having a holy diet. And at the end of the day, kosher is a super rational commandment. It's in the category of mitzvot that are chukim. We don't understand necessarily why certain things are kosher and certain things are not, or why God doesn't want us to mix milk and meat, for example. We do it because God instructs us to do it, and it's part of our way of being distinct, holy and distinctive and separate, and whatever other intention God has. We could theorize, we could philosophize, but ultimately Hashem knows it. And I saw this thought, and I'll just finish with this, is that, when you eat food, you enjoy the taste of the food. And when it comes to mitzvot, we talk about the ta'amei ha-mitzvot. Now, the word ta'amei in Hebrew could mean reason or taste. The reason for a mitzvah gives it its flavor, gives it its taste. But ultimately, you shouldn't just eat for flavor and taste. You should eat for nutrients and health. Same thing with mitzvot. We do the mitzvot because this is what God said is spiritually healthy for us. We can enjoy the flavor when there is flavor. When we don't understand why we can't eat certain foods, we do it anyways because that's what God tells us is a Jewish spiritual kosher diet. And, taste is a spiritual thing because the meat or the fish I can see. The taste is not something tangible that you could see. The taste is something God put in the food. It's like a spiritual quality that you can enjoy. And the same thing is all of spiritual. So when you eat your food and you feel the taste, that is the spiritual blessing. I mean, God created the food too, but he even infused it with taste. He gave it that extra dimension. So we not only eat to survive and to stay alive and to be healthy, but we actually eat and enjoy the food because God loves us so much that he wants us to actually, just like every Jewish mother gets nachas and pleasure when they see their children eating because they know their children are getting pleasure and they always want to feed them a lot of food. So too Hashem wants us to eat and enjoy our food. And that's why he gave us such a variety of food and gave us so many different textures and colors and flavors and tastes so we can enjoy all the varieties of these blessings. With that comes some restrictions where he says, but don't eat this and don't eat that. And that's the laws of kosher that fascinatingly, I'll just conclude by saying, I was in Publix the other day before Pesach, and there was some non-kosher for Pesach Manischewitz products mixed in with the kosher section for Pesach. So I spoke to the manager saying, you may think it's kosher because it's Manischewitz or whatever, but it doesn't have the OUP. And even though he's the manager of Publix, I was really surprised because I thought, oh, he must know all about kosher because he's the manager of Publix. He really didn't know. He didn't know what OU was. He didn't know what OK was. He really didn't know. And he found it fascinating. And it really is fascinating that you could walk into any supermarket in America and walk down any aisle you want and look for any product you want. And there's always a kosher brand. Whether you're looking for ketchup, or you're looking for barbecue sauce, or you're looking for orange juice, or you're looking for water. And, I'm holding a bottle of water here. Let me see if this water has a kosher symbol on it right here. You can't see it, but it has an OUP. It's kosher for Pesach. Now you may say, well, water, why does it have to be OUP? But that gets into the laws of kosher. You can't have any strands of anything else mixed in it. So if this water was produced on a machine that they just finished making non-kosher grape juice, for example, you have to kosher the machine. So that's why the water needs a kosher system. But imagine how far we've come, that these laws of kosher that were given 3,333 years ago, which you may think, oh, this is an old story, something that happened in a desert 3,330 years ago. God gave the laws of kosher. But the kosher industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, okay? Not only Jews, by the way, a lot of Muslims and even non-Jews look for kosher products. What's the famous company, the meat company, National, what's the companies that we answer to a higher authority? That was their advertisement. Hebrew National, right? Is that who it was? So the point is, it appeals to non-Jews. Oh, we answer to a higher authority. We don't just make sure our food is meeting the FDA standards. We're making sure that it's meeting God's standards, the higher authority. And they're advertising that not for the Jews who keep kosher, it's for the non-Jews. We answer to a higher authority. And that's what kosher says. Every time I sit down to eat a meal, I'm reminded, we answer to a higher authority. And the fact that the laws of kosher that we read in this week's Torah portion are played out in every supermarket in the world through kosher symbols is remarkable. And it just shows you the influence of the Jewish people. And I always say to others, even if you don't care about kosher, which obviously as a Jew you should, just to support the Jewish people. If you're in the supermarket and you have to buy ketchup or whatever product you have to buy, and there's two brands, one has a kosher symbol, one doesn't. By learning which one has the kosher symbols and going for that product, you are helping support the kosher industry and making kosher more accessible, because the reason why these companies are putting the kosher symbol and paying for the supervision is a business decision. They want to sell more. So the more you support that, you're helping support kosher in America and in the world. So you're doing, besides the mitzvah of eating kosher, which doesn't cost you more money because the kosher brand doesn't cost more than the non-kosher brand. So why buy the non-kosher brand if you can buy the kosher one? Besides the fact that you're doing a mitzvah, the kosher brand tastes just as good. You're not losing out on taste, quality, or money. But not only that, you're helping support kashrut, a very important mitzvah in this week's Torah portion. So I wish everyone a beautiful day, and look forward to seeing everyone who's in town on Shabbat. And have a wonderful, wonderful. Remember, if you didn't count the Omer, today's the 9th day of the Omer, and we look forward to seeing everyone soon. And thank you for joining us today. Have a good day.